You've heard the term everywhere: LLM, large language model. It's what powers ChatGPT, Gemini, and a bunch of other AI tools showing up in your daily life. But when people say LLM, they often sound like it's magic, like the computer just knows things. So let's slow down and decode it in plain English. What is a large language model, and what does it actually do? Let's start with the name, because it gives you most of the answer. Large, language, model. First, model. In AI, a model is basically a system that learns patterns from data and uses those patterns to make predictions. That's it. No mystery. It's a pattern learner. If it sees enough examples of something, like how words tend to follow other words, then it can guess what comes next more and more accurately. Now, language. This particular model studies the patterns of human language. It learns things like how sentences are usually built, how questions connect to answers, what kinds of words commonly show up together, and how tone and context can shift meaning. It's not studying English class in the human sense. It's absorbing the statistical rhythms of language until those rhythms start to look and behave like understanding. And then, large. This is where it gets impressive. A large language model is trained on a huge amount of text, often billions of pages, sometimes a big slice of what's available publicly online. That's far beyond what any human could read in 1,000 lifetimes. The model doesn't read like you do. It processes text in a way that turns language into patterns it can use. So how does it learn? Here's the clever trick, and it's simpler than it sounds. During training, the model plays a game with itself, billions of times. Imagine you take a sentence and remove the next word. The model has to guess what belongs there. It sees the word so far, then predicts the missing piece. If it's wrong, the system corrects it. If it's right, it reinforces that success. Guess, check, adjust. Over and over, across massive amounts of text. At first, it's terrible. Early guesses come out like nonsense. But as training continues, the model becomes better at predicting the next word. And as you get better at predicting what comes next, you're forced to learn the underlying structure. Grammar, common phrasing, relationships between ideas, and even hints of logic, because those are what make language predictable. Think of it like this. If you had to predict the next word in millions of explanations about science, you'd start picking up how explanations work. You might not become a scientist, but you'd learn patterns of reasoning. That's the same vibe. The understanding you see is an outcome of getting really good at prediction. It's not programmed in as a list of facts. One more thing people miss. An LLM doesn't keep knowledge like a tidy database. It's not sitting there with a file drawer labeled Capital of France, Paris, or a spreadsheet of world facts. Instead, that knowledge is spread across the model in the form of parameters, massive numbers learned during training. Those numbers shape how it predicts the next word. So the model's memory is distributed through its settings, not stored as clean, retrievable entries. That's why it can sound creative. When it's missing a detail, it can still generate something plausible. And it's also why it can be confidently wrong. If the model predicts what's most likely to sound correct, it might produce an answer that feels right, even when it isn't true. And that brings us to the big limits. Because an LLM is fundamentally predicting language, not verifying truth, it can hallucinate, meaning it may invent facts, fake quotes, wrong dates, or details that never happened. The scariest part is that those inventions can be incredibly convincing because they match the style of real information. It can also be out of date. Unless it's specifically connected to live sources, it only knows what it learned during training. So if something changed after the training data, the model won't automatically know. It may guess based on what's typical, not what's current. So should you treat an LLM like an all-knowing oracle? No. Think of it more like a very powerful autocomplete system, trained on a mountain of text, one that can write, explain, summarize, and brainstorm with impressive fluency. Now, why does understanding all this matter for you? Because once you know what an LLM is doing, you can use it smarter. You stop asking, is it definitely right? And start asking, is this useful and does it check out? You become more careful with claims, especially numbers, citations, and factual details. You learn to treat the output as something to evaluate, not something to worship. And that shift, understanding the limits, turns you from a casual user into a confident one. So let's tie it together. A large language model is a pattern learning system trained on an enormous amount of text. It learns how language tends to work by repeatedly guessing missing words and correcting itself. Over time, the ability to predict language becomes an ability to produce explanations that sound like reasoning. But it's not a database of facts, and it doesn't automatically verify truth, so it can hallucinate or go stale. Once that clicks, everything these tools do starts to make sense. The fluency, the creativity, the occasional confident mistake. LLMs aren't magic. They're powerful pattern machines that generate language, and understanding that is the difference between being amazed and being informed.